is music and there is rock on there, and it's going to blow your mind who number one is. But first news coming off the 3-day weekend, and the biggest being Guns N' Roses announcing yet more touring in 2023. And hyping it up some by sponsoring a car in the Daytona 500 over the weekend. Now, I am not a NASCAR guy, so I don't know much about auto racing at all. But I know that the Daytona 500 is a big deal. And I know that NASCAR is a big deal. But I couldn't tell you anything about the racing and the drivers or any of that. But according to the press release that I'm reading this from, Guns N' Roses sponsored the number 43 car this weekend, which was driven by Eric Jones. And my understanding is the car crashed. Joel, are you into NASCAR at all?
I'm not into it, but I'm familiar with the story. Like, I know what happened in the race because it's the race is a big deal. So, I mean, right. Yeah, the unfortunate wreck. Did the car? I mean, I don't think anybody got hurt. We would have heard about that. Thankfully, nobody got hurt. But did the car like crash and then that was it? It was over, or did it resume the race? I don't even know. As far as I know, they were done at that point. I wasn't watching the race, so I just I was checking out headlines along the way, obviously seeing that Guns N' Roses had one. But I think that took them and that took that car and I think a couple others out of the race. Yeah, which was eventually won by Ricky Stenhouse. Yeah, there was more than just this car involved in the crash, but I mean, I'm not laughing about, I mean, it's funny not funny, but you put all this money into sponsoring this car and then the car everybody's looking at is one of the ones that crashes, but thankfully everybody's okay, of course, but let's just say it didn't win because the car crashed, but the car was done up with the GNR logo, the roses on the hood, Guns N' Roses across the side. And my assumption is, even though I'm not a NASCAR guy, knowing how popular it is, my assumption is that it costs a ton of money to have that sort of advertising and announcing yet more touring in 2023. And hyping it up some by sponsoring a car in the crash. But I mean, I'm not laughing about, I mean, it's funny not funny, but you put all this money into sponsoring this car and then the car everybody's looking at is one of the ones that crashes. But thankfully everybody's okay, of course. But let's just say it didn't win because the car crashed. But the car was done up with the GNR logo, the roses on the hood, Guns N' Roses across the side. And my assumption is, even though I'm not a NASCAR guy, knowing how popular it is, my assumption is that that probably costs a ton of money to have that sort of advertising and branding on a NASCAR car in the Daytona 500. But we know that Guns N' Roses is making a ton of money, so it's probably a mere bag of shells for them to throw that on the car. So anyway, that came out and then followed by today what it really was teasing, which is setting up yet another run of touring. So the press release is not anything to do with what a lot of Guns N' Roses fans have been asking about for 7-8 years. Will there ever be a new record or a newly written song? But they will continue to work the road. And we've talked about this before, and I've said this before. There is no doubt that Guns N' Roses will always do business. They will always do business around the world in headline festivals and all of that. But you also have to wonder how much longer, when you consider there really is no new music and no sign of anything coming. We know that Slash told us last year that there's more of these outtakes from Chinese, like Hard School and Absurd, which we've had already. There's more of that coming. But a newly created new record is where the juice would be, and it does not seem like that is at all, for whatever reason, possible for this band. And we now know that they are going into 7-8 years of touring. We also know that they had headline dates prior to COVID hitting, which the CEO of Live Nation, I saw an interview with him, said needed some help. We also know that this band does not do press. I mean, we know, obviously, Axl Rose does not do press. He does not do interviews. And even the other guys in Guns N' Roses, if they're promoting other projects, for whatever reason, it's like hush hush on GNR, there's not too much forthcoming. So in the absence of press, in the absence of potentially new music, and when you factor in that, as we've talked about, Guns N' Roses has essentially 3 albums in their whole catalog to really pull from. Sure, there's a couple more, but we know there's 3 that people generally really know and want to hear. So, and bringing that up, essentially, it's the same show is my point. It can't change that much. And the fact that this has made the rounds through cities 3-4 times at this point, and money's tight for people, and tickets aren't cheap, and there's talk of looming recession, and everybody on the planet's out on the road, I am going to be real curious to see how this does going out there yet again. We'll find out. I think the COVID pause did Guns N' Roses wonders because, again, prior to that, they had a tour announced that Michael Rapino from Live Nation, who's the guy behind all this in terms of the promoter, said it needed help. So where will they be now? Is the juice still there? We'll find out because they've announced a whole nother run of touring. The other thing I didn't realize is, and I'm getting all this from the press release, so even though nothing really has changed on the shows itself, the band, the set list, or any of that, they've changed the name of the tour a few times. Because if you recall, the tour started out as the Not in This Lifetime tour. A reference to the fact that when I think it was Axl was once asked if Guns N' Roses would ever reunite, his quote was, "Not in this lifetime." That tour ran 2016 through 2019 for 3 years. Then COVID hit, stuff shut down 2020. Then they went back out on the road in 2021 and they called that tour the We're Fucking Back Tour. And now they are rolling out a tour, and I don't know if this tour has a name. It just says global tour dates. So I don't know if this is still considered, we're fucking back. I don't know. All these tours get names now, it's just not, hey, we're going out on the road. Everything's got a name. Especially most of the time when tours would go out, the tour would be named after whatever the artist's current or new record was. But again, there's no new record here. Same thing with Def Leppard and Motley Crue. The Stadium Tour, the World Tour. There is no new Motley Crue record. And they couldn't name the tour after Def Leppard's record because it's a co-headline. Anyway, the next run of Guns N' Roses live shows, and there are shows around the world here, starts in Israel, which is interesting because we had David Draymond on the show a couple weeks ago talking about Disturbed playing in Israel, where he has family. And I was talking to him about the rock scene there and what it's like to play there and do a lot of bands tour there. Well, Guns N' Roses are going there to play, and they will start there on June 5th. And then they go to Spain and UK and festivals in Italy and France and all these different spots in Europe. And then that wraps up July 22nd in Greece. Then the stuff in America looks like, well, actually they start in Canada, August 5th, Montreal, August 8th. And then the US stuff starts August 11th, Hershey, Pennsylvania. And then wraps up again in Canada, in Vancouver, on October 16th, the last US show being October 11th in Phoenix. Most of these dates are stadium headlining dates. There are some arenas in here. Kentucky and Lexington is an arena. What else is an arena? Knoxville. So some of the smaller markets are arenas. But a lot of this is, there's a few festivals, but a lot of it is headlines in stadiums. They are doing in New York, New Jersey, MetLife Stadium, which is where the Giants and Jets play, August 15th. They're playing Fenway Park, which is a small stadium. In Boston, of course, on the 21st. Wrigley Field, also a small stadium, on the 24th. They're playing in Saratoga, New York, which I think is a shed gig. So it's kind of scattered as far as the size of the buildings, but they're anywhere from, for the most part, arenas to stadiums to, in the case of MetLife, a huge stadium. I don't know what the capacity is in some of these others. I mean, again, baseball stadiums by nature are way smaller than football stadiums. And the other interesting thing about looking at all the dates is there's a lot of days off in between. So you go like, there's at least 2 days off between every gig. So they play the 5th, off 6, 7, play the 8th, off 9, 10, play the 11th, play the 11th of August, don't play again till the 14th. Or I'm sorry, the 15th, 4 days off. And then they've got 6 days off between New Jersey and Boston. Now, I don't know if that's like that because if they sell out, they've got holds for additional dates, or if it's like that just because they want the rest. But that's the other interesting thing about this. There's anywhere from 2 to 5 days off between gigs. So even though the U.S. stuff or North America stuff doesn't start till August 5th and wrap up till October 16th, it's not as many shows as you think because there's a ton of off days. And honestly, if it's not, it's probably not to hold. I mean, in some places, maybe it's to hold for additional dates, but it's probably because Axl wants that time. The guy's now in his early 60s. These shows are usually very long. And the recovery gets harder and harder. And I've talked about this before. You know, Aerosmith does this when they play. Even when this last residency Aerosmith did, if you looked, they were only playing 2 to 3 times a week. There was at least 2 days off between shows. I know for a fact that's because Steven Tyler, who of course is way older than Axl, but Steven Tyler insists on that time to rest and recover vocally, physically. Understandable, but the thing about that is it's extraordinarily expensive to tour and have a lot of nights off, especially when you're touring. Aerosmith doing a residency, no big deal. They're not on the road with the crew. But when you're on the road and you're a band like Guns N' Roses, who have an enormous crew and like 8 people in the band itself, those 4 or 5 nights, 3, 4 nights, you're sitting in a city. These guys aren't staying at the Red Roof. There's huge overhead as far as, you're not generating money and you're just sitting in a city. I get it. And they can afford it because God knows they've made a cajillion dollars since they've been doing this back again. But that's a business side of it that jumped out to me that's pretty interesting. But everybody's always got to defer to the singer because it's the singer, and in this case, it's the guy that runs the band. So some of these shows going on sale or pre-sales and all that stuff on Friday. And here we go with another run of GNR dates and scattered all over the place, all over the globe, starting in June, ending in October. And, this also ties in with, we wondered if Slash was going to find time to get another run in with his band in support of his last record with the Conspirators. Really, if at all that's going to happen, it would be towards the very back end of this year, because it would have been announced already if it was going to happen before they started in June. I've heard some things about what Slash is working on, but I don't think it's public yet. But it's outside of GNR, so I'm not going to say anything until it is. But I do hear some things of some stuff going on as far as music. But again,